Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be breaking down the latest TFT patch 11.18. As the balance of the meta continues to be in a good spot, there's not a ton of changes that they need to make to the game. We're also several weeks into the mid-set, so now is the time for smaller patches. Plus, any egregious issues that do pop up can easily be adjusted in a hotfix or V-patch. With all that said, let's go ahead and get started. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come. Be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video. As mentioned, the balance has been in a fantastic spot, so there's not a ton of changes this patch. There's no system changes and only one trait adjustment, so let's go ahead and dive into the only trait change of the patch. Hellions got a minor buff at the higher tiers to get players potentially chasing after 6 or 8 Hellion type compositions. We've seen Hellions fall off heavily in the meta ever since Tristana was smacked by the nerf bat. Only Zig's rerolls seem to be playable, and even then it's been quite rare. To give Hellions a helping hand, they're buffing 6 Hellions to 80% attack speed from 70% and 8 Hellions to 140% from 130%. Fairly sizable buffs considering the way attack speed scales. The issue is, will it ever be worth running 8 or even 6 Hellions? Tristana is still nowhere to be seen, though there's potential for a comeback with these buffs. The only Hellion champion doing well past the early game besides Lulu, who gets a pass because she's a Mystic, is Teemo. Teemo carry comps aren't a common occurrence since Teemo is mainly used as additional CC for other boards. All in all, these are small but decent buffs, just unlikely to do much until players figure out a way to make a Hellion carry playable. That's it for the only trait change. Let's go ahead and dive on into the champion changes for patch 11.18. There's quite a few 4-cost champions being adjusted this patch, but before we get into those, let's talk about the low-cost champions first, starting with Gragas. Gragas receives a respectable 75 damage buff to his ability at level 3. The goal here is basically just to buff the reroll Dawnbringer comp known as Chug Jug. That's really it, though it's unlikely to make much of a difference as the composition is fairly hit or miss. Maybe a bit of extra damage will make it hit more than miss. Moving from 1 cost to the only 2-cost champion change, we have Pyke. It seemed like Pyke is being buffed here as they're adjusting the way he chooses a new target when dashing. A lot of the time, particularly against cornered champions, Pyke's targeting AI would have some issues. Now Pyke will always choose a new combat target after dashing, which should help him be more consistent and a bit less derpy. Overall, this seems like a good change, but it's hard to say without extensive testing to see how much of a difference it really makes. And the last of the low-cost champion changes are to 3 costs. Oh boy, do they have it out for 3-cost champions as 2 of them are being nerfed. First up is Nidalee. While this isn't a massive change, it's still a nerf as Nidalee is going down to 750 health from 800. Nidalee has a higher effective health pool because of dodge, so it's not much of a nerf as it would be for other champions, but a nerf is a nerf. That said, this does lower both the Skirmisher shield and the amount of health gained from Dawnbringer as their max health is lowered. It is unfortunate they seem to want to continually bring down the power level of 3-cost champions, particularly item carries, since they should be impactful during the mid-game. At least for Nidalee, she'll remain relevant because of multiple factors, but there's definitely a blow to her priority in the meta. Nunu is up next for the nerf bat as his ability is losing a bit of damage. The damage is going down to 450, 700, 1750 from 500, 750, 1800. Keep in mind that this is the base damage of the ability. It is increased by 50% and becomes true damage whenever Nunu has more health than the enemy champion he's targeting. That doesn't mean it's not a nerf, but in most situations, Nunu is still going to do a good amount of damage. On the one hand, this likely has been a long time coming, as Nunu has been one of the best 3-costs for quite some time. On the other hand, it's another nerf to a 3-cost champion. It feels like the meta is continually being pushed towards the late game and slowly making low-cost champions less relevant. It's probably too early to sound the alarm, but hopefully they slow down on nerfing 3-cost champions in future patches. And lastly, for 3 costs, we have an actual buff to Yasuo. Of course, this isn't a numbers buff, but instead they've reduced the cast time on his ability. What this means is whenever Yasuo does the animation of his ability, he'll now go back to dealing damage in less time than previously, effectively increasing his damage output. While it is a nice quality of life change for Yasuo, it's not suddenly going to make him overpowered, but at least it has potential to bring him back into the meta. And honestly, it's nice to see Yasuo receiving a buff, as most of Set 5 patches have been nerfs to him. Now it's time to dig into the meat of the patch, the 4-cost changes. But a few of these are 3-star 4-costs, so let's begin with the other champion changes, beginning with Ivern. Revenants have been one of the best frontline synergies for practically all of Set 5. A lot of that has to do with Ivern and Volibear, though the introduction of Fiddlesticks also helped. But primarily, it's the other two champions that have done well. The reason? Crowd control. Both Ivern and Volibear added a lot of CC to the board, and it's guaranteed CC since they are Revenants, meaning they will revive and be able to cast, or cast while reviving. Unfortunately for Ivern, it seems they want to move away from that identity and turn this ability into more of an interrupt. To accomplish this, they're reducing the stun duration of Daisy down to 0.5 seconds at levels 1 and 2. Previously, the stun duration was 1.5 seconds at Tier 1 and 2 seconds at Tier 2. Going down to 0.5 seconds is a huge nerf in that regard. The compensation is a buff to the health of Daisy as it's going up to 1600-2600 from 1500-2400, plus an AD increase of 10 from 80 to 90. Those buffs seem to pale in comparison to the huge nerf as the CC from Daisy has been such a big part of the Set 5 meta. Expect to see a lot less Ivern and a lot more Knights and other frontliners as players are likely to distance themselves from using Ivern, at least for the first few days of the patch. Next up, we have a few nerfs to Jax. Jax has turned into one of the most flexible 4-cost carries as his power spike in stage 4 and 5 is unrivaled. It seems that Jax is doing a bit too well, so that means the nerf bat is swinging his way, starting with a reduction of 50 health. In addition to that, his ability's attack speed bonus is going from 30 to 35%. At least they're buffing the bonus attack damage as that's going up to 400% at level 3 from 300%. Overall, these are good adjustments. They bring his balance in line with a lot of other 4 costs while giving him a bit of scaling if you 3-star him. Still a fantastic item carry during stages 4 and 5, but maybe a tad less flexible than before. Draven is still struggling to find a place in the meta, so naturally that means it's time for buffs again. The buffs are a 5 attack damage increase, an increase to his ability's flat spell damage, and the AD multiplier is going up as well. Most of the numbers aren't a massive increase and mainly apply to 3-star Draven. You may finally see Draven remain relevant in the meta as a consistent 4-cost carry. That said, he has been buffed multiple times previously and still didn't find consistency, so they may need additional changes in the future. With that, we have a ton of 3-star buffs, all of which you can check out in the patch notes. The main idea behind these buffs is to even out the power of 3-star 4-cost carries, as some of them weren't up to par with the rest. The most notable one is Karma. Not only is she going from 750 to 850 damage on her ability, the mana cost reduction per cast is going up to 40 from 30. What this means is she'll get into rapid cast mode almost right away and deal even more damage than before. Karma is still on the fringe of being viable in the meta as occasionally players are able to use her effectively, so maybe increasing her value at level 3 will push her into the foreground of the meta. Let's move on to the 5-cost champion changes, starting with Volibear. Much like Ivern, Volibear is also being nerfed. Maybe Revenants won't be so relevant in this patch. Anyway, the nerf makes it so Volibear no longer deletes enemy shields. Instead, his ability does double damage to shields. In addition to that, the amount of damage his ability does is being reduced down to 125-250 from 150-300. For the most part, this change won't be too noticeable, as a lot of the meta shields don't go that much higher than 500. Instead, it makes a difference for things like Rel 3 or 8 Nightbringer, or such champions and synergies that provide a massive amount of shields. In those cases, Volibear will be noticeably weaker. That said, it is an all-around nerf to Volibear and does lower his value in the meta, especially since Ivern is also being nerfed, making Revenants a lot less appealing outside of Nocturne Assassin. Still, the duo of Ivern and Volibear won't completely disappear, but are definitely further down in frontline priority. Kayle has found a nice place in the meta revolving around late-game Rageblade and Deathblade, but the scaling she gains from Deathblade is a bit too good, so they're lowering the AD scaling of her first Ascension to 60-80% from 80-90%. As a compensation for the nerf, they buffed her base attack damage to 80 from 75. It's not much, but a buff is a buff. It does mean that players have to look for new ways to itemize Kayle, as Deathblade won't scale nearly as well as it did before. Will it completely cut her out of the meta? Potentially, since she was mainly relevant thanks to Deathblade, but time will tell as players explore new ways to play Kayle. And lastly, for champions is an adjustment to Viego, as the spell damage is going from 180-360 to 150-400. The goal here is to make Viego 1 less viable and make Viego 2 a heavy hitter. This change is not great because Viego is the definition of unfun to play against. The idea behind it is fine, but few players enjoy playing against Viego when he's strong in the meta. That's it for champion changes, so let's now move on to the last section, items. Up first is a fairly large nerf to Radiant Bloodthirster, which reduces the max health shield down to 40% from 60%. This is quite the nerf, but it's worth considering that the shield was way too massive at 60%. Maybe it's too much of a nerf and they'll need to revisit the number in future patches. That said, Radiant Bloodthirster is one of the more over-kitted Radiant items, so it's likely to remain relevant moving forward. Another large change is the Radiant Locket rework, which provides 200 health to all allies at the start of combat, though the shield is reduced to 400, 500, 600 from 600, 700, 800. Still, 200 health to all champions on your board is crazy good. At level 8, that's an increase of 1600 health on your board from just one item, not even accounting for the shield the champions gain. Crazy huge buff, maybe a bit too much though, we'll have to wait and see. Radiant Shiv, like Locket, has been heavily underperforming. It's not even a bad item, it's just hard to find a champion to give it to. To help make that decision easier, they're increasing the magic resistance shred to 70% from 50%. Keep in mind this hits 8 champions, so it's effectively reducing the whole enemy board's magic resist by 70%. That's quite good and should propel this item into the meta for players running AP boards, particularly Vel'Koz. Next is a nerf to Radiant Frozen Heart, as it's a bit too effective on the champions that use it, namely Diana. The starting mana is going to 45 from 60, though it's still reducing nearby enemies' attack speed by 50%. Still quite good, just not as good on specific champions. Similarly, Radiant Rapid Fire Cannon is also being nerfed, as it's just been a bit too good on specific champions such as Nocturne. The bonus attack speed is going down to 30% from 40%, so not too massive of a nerf. For those champions that use it, it should remain viable, just not quite as oppressive to play against. And that's all for today's video, folks. All in all, the meta has been in a great spot, so there aren't a lot of changes necessary to improve what we already have. There's definitely some interesting changes that may affect the meta, such as the Ivern nerf and the Radiant Locket buff. Let us know in the comment section below what changes you're the most excited for. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.